All right, we are recording. I'll do the countdown and we'll get into it. Three, two, one. Hey, everybody. I'm Jordan Tenenbaum, the social media manager at Celigo. I'm joined, as always, by my co host, Mark Simon, our vice president of strategy, as well as JW Kim, the ex head of design for Capital One, who's currently working at EX Squared. Welcome to the show, JW. How you doing today?
Good, really good. It's a Friday, so looking forward to the weekend. Lots of work, obviously, but still, yeah.
Nice. Nice. Well, I'm glad
Thanks
that
for
you're in
having
a
me.
glad you're in a good mood, and it's great to have you on. JW, I thought we could kind of introduce the audience to you if they're not sure exactly who you are. But could you tell us just like a little bit about your story? I know you started off as
Yeah,
an engineer, acclaimed
yeah,
quote not so good engineer, even though I think you were
yes.
probably pretty good. But how'd you get from engineering into the design world? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, to tell that story, I have to go way back. But since this is a podcast, I think we have a little bit of time. But so my journey in design started when I was in third grade, I would say. I grew up in a British colony called Brunei. It's in Southeast
Hmm.
Asia. My parents are Korean. The most memorable class was an art class in third grade. And after third grade, they stopped the art education for me. And so then I did what was natural for me, which was like more math. I didn't like to memorize things, so I didn't take the literature route. I took more the math route. So proceeded to do electrical engineering, robotics to be more specific, because I like to work with my hands. Wasn't that great in school, and that was in Korea, and then I was looking at the environmental problem, and this was the 90s, late 90s. So, and I thought like, hey, I love nature. I was sailing at that time, and I decided to do a master's in environmental engineering. And then when I came here to the US for that, and what I realized was that environmental engineering was really not about prevention, but taking the gunk that comes out of factories and treating them, as opposed to figuring out how to prevent them. So I was super disappointed. And then I figured, you know what, might as well take environmental engineering, make the best out of it. So I did a master's in hybrid electric vehicles. There was a professor there that had this algorithm of how to run a hybrid electric vehicle very efficiently. So my thesis was around comparing the environmental impact of electric, hybrid electric, and normal internal combustion engines. And that was late 90s. I couldn't get a job, but somehow I ended up in tech because that was booming. And a few years in, I came across a company called IDEO. Somehow that felt magical. I'm not sure if you know about IDEO. And I just looked into how you like what kind of people were working there, and I realized, oh, it's there's a program in Stanford that teaches this. I go, okay, you know what, I have to go back to school for this degree. This feels like me. So that was, mid 30s, mid career, gave up everything, went back,
Mhm.
and I've been in design since. So that's my journey. So it's been a long ride, but for me, at the end of the day, fulfillment is what I strive for.
That's awesome. That's a really cool journey from Brunei all the way to working all the way up to Capital One in terms of doing design. So I appreciate you kind of I guess giving us that perspective. In terms of design, I think that's something that we have
Mhm.
not talked about a ton on this podcast. We're typically Mark and I are deep into the technical things, but you do have a technical background, and
Mhm.
you obviously work in design. So I'm kind of curious. Could you talk to us a little bit about your philosophy in terms of designing content around um, technical products or technical brands? How do those two overlap? What does the Venn diagram look like? What is your philosophy when you're creating or designing for technical things that sometimes are a little bit more complex than basic design principles can handle?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a like I can think of offhand like a great Venn diagram. But when I've been at companies like Citrix, where we were designing for very, very sort of technical crowd, if you will. And I think at the end of the day, if you abstract like what designers do, really you're trying to get down to fundamentals or first principles, if you will. But I think for me, for a designer in that space, you really, really have to understand a little bit of the technical side of things to do a really good job. Otherwise, then you end up just being a stylist. You know, you make things pretty or you become usable. So to really, really be a good designer in that space, I think you have to understand your audience, first of all, abstract what they're really trying to do. So, you know, it could be very technical, but at the end of the day, like you have to abstract like what is their ultimate goal. So that gets into research, what we usually call research and design. And, you know, I would argue that for great products to be built, whether it's design audience or non-design audience, like such as yourself, the critical piece is not just the designers but the team around the designers. So I would argue that almost everyone is a designer, whether you like it or not. If you look around you, everything is designed, but the person making it may not know that they were designing stuff. Like, so this bookshelf obviously is designed, the corners and everything like that, but still someone thought about making this corner. Maybe it was the designer that did it, but for some things, in everyday things, there's a person that just made it without knowing that they were designing stuff. So if you look all around us, everything is designed. I think the same goes for, you know, programming languages. You know, if you want to make it easy and intuitive, the words you choose and all of that is ultimately quote unquote design. And so that's why I think for real strong products or services to be made, like to be produced, I think the team around the design is just as critical as the designers you have. I don't know if I quite answered your question, but you know, that
No, you did. That was
that's
beautiful.
Yeah, and JW, that's really interesting to hear. That brings up a question for me, and this is coming from
yeah,
someone that's well outside of the design world and
yeah,
never thinking of myself as an artist or really even creative, but
yeah.
realizing there's creativity in a lot of things, whether it comes out that way or not. And for me, it brings up a question: where's the dividing line between engineering and design? Because it seems like at a certain point they start really like intertwining. That sometimes the best engineering is you have these very beautiful like, and I'm like, oh, I know there's creativity in engineering excellence, but how do you where do you draw that line between those two?
Ooh, like I'm more of a generalist, so I've been on both. So I
Yeah,
just don't see an actual line like some people do.
yeah,
And so for me, like the best experiences I've had is where the engineers were pushing us on design stuff and we were pushing engineering on some engineering things. And we
hmm
just never really said like, this is your space, stay out of my lane, and this is my space. I'm gonna stay in my lane and you stay in yours. Like almost felt like the debates we were having, again, these are not contentious, you know, like we don't throw things at each other. It's more like we know we want to make better stuff. So I don't know if there's an actual line. I personally am a firm believer that you like cross-functional teams, product manager, you know, the trio: product manager, designer,
hmm
engineer. I like them to work together from start to finish. So everyone's a product manager, everyone's a sort of a quote unquote designer. I don't think everyone can be an engineer, but everyone can sort of, you know, push the engineer if they find something like magical that they think is great for the user. You know, sometimes you have to push technology for that. And so the quote from like Pixar, like art challenges technology, technology inspires the art. Like I truly believe in that. Like so for me, the I hope there's no line. Like for me personally.
it's a seamless blend between the two. It sounds like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind,
Yeah.
you recently wrote a piece on Medium that I was taking a look at, and you use some language that it was new to me, and so I kind of wanted to ask you about that and how you
Yeah.
define it. You said that design offense is more important than design defense.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're a fan of soccer or football.
Yeah.
I don't know which you call it, um,
Yes.
but
Both.
both. Okay, good. I didn't want to offend or anything. But what is design offense, and how does it differ from design defense, and um, how do you kind of apply that to the work that you're doing, when it's a technical product?
Yeah, I'd say I think the article again. I haven't written much articles, but this is hopefully like a start of a new year, new resolution. When I see back at my career for the 20 plus years, there's probably only a couple of instances where the people around me were very mature in design, if you will, like engineers. I'm talking about like engineers, product managers. A lot of times, most often, you are working with people that either are unfamiliar with designers or they've
Mhm.
never worked with a designer. And so, when I talk about offense versus defense, I think again, being a design snob, I will just openly say it. We've had 20 plus years since the launch of the iPhone. It's done a lot of good in terms of design. Everyone, I think, cares or understands more about design. But still, I think there's very few products out there that I go like, wow, this is great design, or they continue to produce great design. And so when I talk about offense, it's more about always trying to push yourself to innovate, but at the same time, it doesn't you're not just innovating because there's new technology. It's sort of a whole package. The product
Mm,
is great technology, but it's also great design. It's a blend, and of course, it makes a lot of money. At the end of the day, we're in businesses. So what I talk about, that like that sort of the thinking there, whereas design defense is more, hey, we got this great idea, this new technology, or this new thing. Hey, design team, can you just kind of make this look pretty, or make this do some user testing to make sure that this is usable, and just focus on this. And in that environment, design is sort of, like it comes later. It doesn't come in the beginning. And I remember I talked about like the teams beginning, the team, like the cross-functional team being together from start to finish. Like you don't see that. It's more, I got this idea, let me hash it out, and then I'm going to give it to the designers. And so in that instance, what ends up happening invariably is like there's like things that are important to the designer. We call it like the underside of the table has to be polished. Like even people don't see it. That's sort of the quality mindset you have. Like those, you are debating about those. Like you're debating about why you should. You're justifying, as opposed to letting designers do good work. They spend half the time like justifying. And so offense for me is like you don't have to do that. Like you're all like wanting the best design no matter what, and the best product. So
Awesome.
that's how I differentiate it.
It's interesting.
right.
So, what companies, maybe what software companies are embracing offensive design that, if you can think of any off the top of your head? I'm just curious.
Um, so Apple, I think, like most people say, would be in that category, but I just don't like recent years. I don't think they're quite there anymore, but used to be. I'd say like the other interesting companies are like Airbnb, for example. I think they're doing interesting things. And there's a Brian Chesky, the CEO. I think he talks about like how cars are getting better every 4 years because of a new model. But when you look at apps, you don't see that. You don't see like apps being much
Mhm.
better after 4 years. It's always incremental updates, and it hasn't changed much since like whatever 5 years ago when it launched, for example. And so I think Airbnb is trying to do few things but big things every year. They're more on a hardware cycle, I would call it. So I think that's interesting there. And then Square, I think Jack Dorsey with Cash App and things like that, I think are pushing the envelope a little bit. So
Awesome. No, that's I appreciate that. It's kind of interesting because we work in, Mark and I were in the software world, and design manifests in content, and design also manifests in UI and UX. And so it's kind of interesting to hear your perspective about what other companies in a similar sphere are
yeah,
really excelling, because those are all companies that are tangible. We understand Apple, we understand Airbnb, and for folks like Mark and I, it just kind of helps um, put things in perspective. Um,
So,
Go
so
ahead, Mark.
in relation to that, JW, where does usability come into play? And how do you think about usability as a designer or interface with usability specialists?
I mean, it's a key part of design, obviously. And remember is there a line between usability and aesthetics? And my feeling is there's more overlap than there's a line in my
Mhm.
mind. So, but at the end of the day, yeah, if someone's buying a product and it's not usable, no matter how pretty it is, then you failed. I mean, if
Yeah.
you had to like pick a side, if you will. But I think when you have a really strong design team, like what you learn in design school as a visual designer or graphic designer is like typography, typeface, designing that. And if you boil down sort of the user interface into the smallest element, it's words and it's letters. And so people trained in that know, like what words are more readable, for example. But also they can think about like what typefaces are better for your brand, that would represent your brand if it's more modern, for example. I'm sure you guys went through that with your rebrand. You spend countless hours, like to a layperson it's like this, similar to that, similar to that, but to them it's not. To the graphic designer it's not, because I don't know, it's sort of, so back to the usability. I think both have a huge part to play. I know that wasn't the question, but I think like I said, like you have to nail that. That's like table stakes.
Yeah, it feels like these things are all kind of like key legs to a stool, so to speak. That you don't you can't you can't remove any one of them. And if it's a really good product, they all come together seamlessly. And
Yeah,
really you don't know where you don't think about those things when you use a great product, whether it's software or it's a physical product. I think you're not thinking about whether it's beautiful or if it's usable. It's beautiful and it works and it
yeah,
solves the problem. And you're really unconscious to a lot of those, and maybe that's a sign when you've got it right.
yeah. I think, yeah, exactly. I think best design is when you don't have to think. It's sort of subconscious. You know where to go, what to do. If you get to that level, obviously the best is you don't have to tell it. It reads your mind and you're done. Short of that, it's like I process it. I mean, we're working on a bid to win a contract, and I had to figure out an analogy of like uh, what good design or design system, something that every company uses today. It's a system of like buttons, and a lot of different things, brand elements. And the metaphor I use is an airport. Like airport is custom built. It's a hub. It's a platform. But the key thing is you're there to provide some traveler to go from point A to point B. You're just a means to an end. The end is they want to be in the Bahamas, drinking Mai Tais. The
Me
airport,
too.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The airport is a means to an end. Like, don't get in the way of this person getting there. So how can you make it
Mm.
super smooth? There's a security check and all that. But when you're in a rush, I've had this happen to me, and it's an unfamiliar airport. The signs, like that's when I think people realize the importance of hierarchy: big letters versus small letters, color versus non-color, putting all similar stuff together, like putting information together.
Mm.
If all the arrows are pointing here, put all the stuff that are related to the arrows pointing here together. Don't put like one there, one there, one there, one there, and you have to scan. There's a lot of different things. And so type hierarchy, color, all those things come into play that are about, like you said, usability. And then if you look underneath that, it's about graphic design. And anyway, I rambled on about it, but I think the airport metaphor, we'll see if it sticks. We're gonna use that for our proposal.
I think it's very sticky. As soon as you said that, I had a memory of probably between the ages of 6 and 12. Anytime I was in an
Mhm.
airport, my dad would always say, "Okay, Jordan, take us to the gate." And I remember trying to like read these screens
Okay.
and look at these arrows, and like, he just wanted to prepare me for real life and get ready to do this kind of things in the future. And I hated it because it was
Yeah.
designed so terribly, and I never looked at it through a design
Yeah.
perspective. But now that you say that, I'm having these flashbacks of reading the departing and arriving charts, and everything looks the same, and I can't tell the difference because
Yeah.
it's just zeros and ones and numbers and things, and trying to figure out where to go. And there's 100 different arrows pointing different directions. And I think that is probably the antithesis of good design. And I think
Yeah.
the more smooth and the more obvious and the less thinking that a brain has to do, the
Yeah.
better the design it is, which is exactly what you said. And I don't know,
Yeah.
that was a fantastic, very sticky metaphor.
Yeah. And I even looked, tell me if if this topic is boring and you want to switch to something else. But because of this, I even researched about like modern airport design. It used to be that the old design of airports is when you check in, there's a counter, and the wall behind the counter is just dark, so you can't really see where next you have to go to. But nowadays, what you see is when you walk in, the counters are sort of sideways, parallel to where you're headed. So you can see, oh, there's the departing gates. It's more transparent. You see the planes beyond that. And so it causes less anxiety. So you use that sort of metaphor in a lot of websites too, right? You say, oh, here's your report, and boom, you put up a, hey, sign up before you, right? Like check in before you get your report. So you have all these sort of elements sort of, you know, play both in the offline world and and online as well. I think that was fascinating. Like,
That's
them kind
interesting.
of say, let them see the actual ultimate target, which is the plane that you're boarding.
It's kind of like software companies that offer up like a sandbox when you're trying out a product. It's like, let me see it. Let me look at what I'm getting to. And I
Yeah,
think that's something that I know Celigo does. We have a 30-day free trial where you can go in and build these integrations and see what works and what connectors we have and connect your different applications and automate the flow of data between them. And yeah, I mean, people wanna see the destination. It's kinda like, imagine looking at a travel brochure and there's no pictures of the place that you're going. It's like, what
right,
the hell's the
exactly.
point? You wanna
Yeah,
you wanna see the destination or at least get a taste of it.
exactly, exactly.
Um, with it's just great a great airport metaphor. I never thought we'd be talking about airports, but, with that in mind and kind of you laying out some good practices and in contrast, some bad practices, um, an airport being like a real life example of real life UI and UX. In the
Mhm.
software world, what are some like design faux pas within UI and UX that um, you just it irks your brain? Because I think Celigo is always looking to improve, and I'm sure there's some little things here and there that just drive people nuts, and we haven't heard about them. And they're probably simple design changes, but maybe in the UI UX space or in general, what are some faux pas that you've noticed across the board in the software space?
Um, I mean, so one thing about design is that you're constantly looking at things and figuring out what's wrong and what's right and how to improve it. There's no off switch. At least for me, I think for a lot of friends I know who's in design is like that. And so, but the funny thing is, I can't, like, nothing comes to mind. But I would say this. Like, one thing that I still can't believe, I have a credit card company. I don't want to like rip them because they're a credit card company that I have personally. But I go to their site, and it loads slowly. That's one. Like, just be to load for one. But then it was built with these modular things where something loads here, something loads there, and then it's janky. It kind of moves like that. And so one of the things that I told like an engineer, I remember like a long time ago when we had this thing we were building, and everything was loading differently, uh, and I tried to click something and then it moved down because something else loaded on top of it, and it, like it moved it down. And so I said, like, you have to think of a page loading, put a sound to it, like put a sound to every little thing that's loading, and that is essentially visual noise. So if something is loading abruptly, like what's a good sound for that? Bump. Okay. Then if something is loading slowly but takes a long time, maybe it's like whoosh. So if you put all that together, bump bush, like if you have a symphony of that or cacophony of that, then I think you can like hear what a bad design is from a loading perspective. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Like
Totally.
you have 4 or 5 engineers saying, okay, you make this sound, you make this sound, you make this sound, you make this sound. That is basically visual noise. And for a designer, because you're so in tune with, because the gift is your eye, I think you notice that more than certain people. Like for the engineer, it's like, it's just loading, who cares? It's gonna load, who cares? But for a user, at the end of the day, if it's a banking and this is a credit card company, like it just diminishes the faith I have in the system of it being secure, of it being working properly, for example. If this was not a big company, it was a new startup credit card, like I just don't know if I want to be dealing with this. So anyway, I hope that kind of tool would help. I think that is one that I still feel like can't believe they're still in business, for example.
So JW, you're basically saying, even with something like this, it's a large organization, if they can't execute on a good, clean design, whether it's conscious or unconscious, a user, a potential buyer, a potential client, whatever it may be, is going to have, essentially they're damaging their credibility by way of that.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you're going to have the younger companies that know this, that know like great design is about a smooth experience, a whoosh, and then it shows up on your screen just once, everything's there. Like they're going to pay attention to that, and at some point, you may get displaced by them.
Interesting. It's a really
it's
good
like
perspective.
not your daddy's credit card, like that's the word that they're going to use. It's like, it's not my daddy's credit card. I actually had that happen to me when I was at Intuit. I can talk about Intuit kind of openly, as well as others, but I think we had an intern come in, and I was hired on to take the desktop products that was built in the 70s, and they were still, updating and maintaining those 70s or 80s, I can't remember. And we were going to SaaS, and the intern comes in, looks at the software and go, wow, that looks like a software my dad would use. Horrible, right? A horrible thing to say. Yeah.
It's I always describe Salesforce as looking like 90s AOL. And maybe pre the update a few years ago, but it's kind of that thing where it's like you just look at some software and you're just like, nope, like that ain't it. That's not going to work for me or my brain. And I don't know. It's just it's interesting to hear this from a designer's perspective. Well, I have one question that's hopefully you feel all right at answering. You used to work at Capital One.
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously a global brand, one of the biggest in the world. How are you able to impact the design at a brand with hundreds of thousands of employees? Like, what were you looking to achieve, and how successful were you in being able to implement what you wanted to? It's such a big global brand.
Yeah. And so I was the head of design for an organization called The Garage. And so if you talk about my passions, obviously one is design, the other is innovation. So innovation like you can come at it from different angles: business innovation, technology innovation, and then we come at it from a human-centered innovation. So essentially for us, for me, my goal was to, and again, I have some background in startup, so really taking sort of the scrappiness of startup mentality and building some, like quick sort of prototypes and concepts for the company. And so I wouldn't say I was successful. So I admit that for first, because at the end of the day, it's a huge company. And so for me, what I was at least able to do was like, and Kendall knows this. Um, we were going down the path of using a lot of illustration for our new look, and this was a decision made before I joined. And then when I came in, I said, like, look, we just went through a whole redesign of this small company. It's not even Capital One. And as much as illustration makes sense, it's also very high maintenance. If you want to then use stock illustration, then that kind of diminishes the value of it, because uh, it's like the guy I see on Microsoft. And Microsoft, this is a true story. Microsoft uses the same stock photo that we used. this African American guy, and so if you're a big brand and you use the same illustration as some other company, then it just diminishes the whole value, right? Like, I can't believe Microsoft is using stock photos, right? For a company that big, you should take your own photos, right? Like that. You want to talk about pet peeves just now? You're a freaking global brand, and you can't even like you can't even like spend some money finding like good stock, like good photographers. Like, that blows my mind. And so at the very least, at Capital One, I think they're gonna go away from the illustration. That I was able to. And then second thing for me, big believer in just you lead by action. So we were able to move fast in certain areas. And for me, work as a team from start to finish. So we did a couple of projects like that. Hopefully that stays, but you never know. Like, culture is such a difficult thing to change, and that's why I wrote that article. It's like, I think at the end of the day, culture is difficult to change. A lot of times when I have interviews, or I had interviews with heads of companies or CEOs, they're wanting this design person to come in and change the culture and make design the forefront of things. And my argument in that article that I wrote is like, it can't. Culture is not something that one person can come in and do and change. The CEO, whoever it is, has to make the change happen. And the way you do that, obviously, is to really know who you are and who you want to be. And then what you have to do is, like, for example, if things are not good enough to launch, and you've been a company that's been shipping every 2 weeks, whether it's good or not, but if design is at the forefront, and if it's not good enough, then you have to like model that behavior. No, we're not gonna ship it, even if it costs us revenues, right? Like, you have to do the hard things, I think. And so I always say, you can bring in an Apple designer, the best Apple designer, bring that person to Microsoft. That person, the Apple designer, more than likely are not going to be successful, just because, again, it's really the culture, the environment. If that is not there, then it's super hard.
Takes a lot to innovate. It's funny that you mentioned the stock photos. I a few years ago I used to work at a company, and I remember I was with a buddy of mine prospecting leads, and we found this guy that was this white guy in a suit with a really cool haircut, and he had this big beard. And at the time, we would just joke about how he was the epitome of like a tech bro. And like
Yeah, yeah,
2 weeks later, we were researching a different company, and a different photo of that same exact guy popped up. And over the
yeah,
next couple of months, we'd see this same guy pop up on new SaaS technology company marketing pages. And it was just like the same guy over and over, cool looking dude with a beard and a suit. And it was just like, is everyone just using the same stock images? And when you don't allow yourself to stand out from the crowd, it's, I don't know, it's a little embarrassing.
Yeah. I
So
think you call that like it's not a metrosexual, it's like a lumbersexual or something like that. I can't remember.
he
You know,
he looked like he would chop wood on the weekends. I would
yeah, yeah,
definitely say that.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
I've seen those too, for sure.
so yeah, it's just interesting that the brands are still doing that. It's kind of mind blowing.
It's amazing. I think I'm in the wrong business. I may just get into stock photo. And maybe with AI, you'll have more variety and stuff. And maybe that's the first place that you'll get these more on brand, customized, whether it's stock photos or illustration that suits you. I mean, that
That's
could be
something we've been doing. That's actually
that's
Kendall's
great.
big push recently has been creating human like, and I mean they look really good, but they are AI generated images of humans that truly align with kind of this new brand push and this new brand design we're going. So Kendall, if you're listening, hey, what's up for me and JW and Mark? But
I think I saw
you're
some of those yesterday, if I remember correctly.
yeah, you did. I don't did you know those were AI generated, Mark?
Well, not until there was something funny about them, but until it was mentioned, it was like I was like, oh, okay, of course they are. They
Yes.
were not quite lifelike,
Uh,
but very lifelike. They're not quite real, but very lifelike at the same time, which then that kind of summarizes it in a way.
100%. And yeah, it's just interesting how technology is kind of like, AI or whatever it is just influencing the future of design. Um
and when are you going live? I'm now super curious what was done.
our newest campaign has just launched. Until we get the whole brand, the website, and every like piece of future content, I want to say like a couple weeks. You should start being able to see new branding show up in quite a few different places, but until it's 100% all encompassing, this excuse me brand rollout will probably be a few more weeks for now. But like I said before the podcast started, we are very excited. Mark's rocking one of the new shirts. um New
Nice.
font, new colors.
Oh,
It should be pretty exciting. We have
Cool.
about we have about 12 minutes left. I have two questions that I want to
Yeah,
ask you, JW, that are not
yes.
particularly design or work related. Mark, I'm curious if you have anything that you want to ask or wrap up with before I do my due diligence at
no,
the end.
I'd actually I love these questions, so go right ahead. This is the maybe the funnest part of the whole our average podcast is when we get to these.
Okay, perfect. Well, if that's the case, Mark, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I'm going to guess that you probably wouldn't see this one coming. So JW, you said that you originally worked on engineering in terms of hybrid, electric, and um, internal combustion engine vehicles, which I'm a huge car nut, so I find that interesting. You also
Mhm.
said you were raised in Brunei, which I
Mhm.
find really interesting. And if you
Yeah,
combine those two pieces of information, the
right.
first thing that pops into my head is the world's most expensive car collection owned by the Sultan of Brunei, Prince
That's
Jeffrey.
right. That's right.
Um, I am, when it comes to all things car related, I'm
Uh-huh.
obsessed with cars and car history. But the most
Okay.
interesting, the crown jewel of my interest when it comes to this is the Sultan of Brunei's car collection. Um,
Yes.
I I actually have some friends in Jakarta who
Okay.
have personal friends who were working for the Sultan of Brunei, doing mechanical and all sorts of upkeep on his vehicles. I'm
Okay.
curious if that subject of history is of any interest to you.
To me personally,
And
uh,
one reason I want to ask is because for those listening, the Sultan of Brunei would contact companies like Bentley and Ferrari and Aston Martin and Rolls Royce and build custom one off cars that the world has never seen. They are incredibly rare, and
gold plated for some of them. Yep.
gold plated, and some of them are just very interesting designs or iterations of other cars.
Yes.
Ferrari SF90. There's a whole bunch of different, the Bentley Buccaneer. There's a whole bunch of these cars that are workshops in design. And so I'm just curious if that ever piqued your interest given your background.
Yeah, I never was a big car guy. I like nice car. I like nice design cars. I still feel like the 911 for me is the like my, like the the car Targa for just because I feel like, but you can sort of get a convertible what you're not, but I've never really ridden in one. So I hear the ride experience is not that great. But yeah, unfortunately, I've never been really a car guy myself. Sorry to say that. Now, my friend, good friend, like yours, he used to work for the Sultan of Brunei, the garage, and one time he brought me there, and I mean, it's just like a long, just huge garage with just you car after car after car after car, and his job was obviously he's not even to fix it. He's just driving it every day because he's got so many cars, and you have to
Oh yeah.
drive it. Drive today. I'm gonna drive the Lotus. Tomorrow I'm gonna drive the Lamborghini. It's just take a pick.
Mark, plug your ears. JW, if he's hiring, please let me know.
Yeah,
Um, no, that's okay. It's totally fine that you are not a car person. I just whenever I don't know a ton of people from Brunei, obviously.
yeah.
And so when I heard that, it piqued my interest, and the fact that you were there is like mind blowing. That's a dream in
Well,
life for me. So,
what do you think of the Cybertruck design wise? I'm curious, like you, Jordan and Mark. Like, what do you
um,
think about it?
well, let's hear Mark first. I'm curious.
Oh, I mean, I think it's horrible. I mean,
Oh,
nothing
great.
short,
Okay.
yeah, nothing short of horrible. Yeah,
Okay.
because it's design. A truck is about function, not about design. And
Yeah.
so it's a utilitarian tool to accomplish a set of tasks. And here
Yeah.
the design has gotten in the way of the function and actually
Yeah.
diminishes the function. And so I think it's just terrible. It's the antithesis of what a truck is. So yeah. That's an opinion if you're looking for one.
I love that. Love that. Love
Mark's
that.
had that in the chamber for months, waiting to unload.
He's not
Um,
gonna buy a Cybertruck then. Okay.
No,
you
no,
know,
that won't be happening.
I think as a design exercise, it's not terrible. I think in terms of I actually completely agree with Mark. Like a truck is a utilitarian thing to haul stuff and go off road and tow 20,000 pounds or an RV. And um I don't know, like again, I'm nerding out about car stuff, but like the Ford Lightning, which is the electric F-150, recently came out, and like when you're towing anything between the extra weight and the aerodynamics, your battery life is cut in like half, basically. And I don't see it being too much different on most electric trucks. So, in my opinion, electric trucks are kind of goofy to begin with, but the Cybertruck, I agree. I'm not a fan. It just kind of I don't know. It looks like a stock car, or not a stock car. Excuse me. You know when like you're a kid and you build those like triangle things that go down the racetrack, like as a Boy Scout. It looks like one of those.
Oh, it looks like a Pinewood Derby car is what you're saying. Okay.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So okay, enough car talk. I want to bring it
And
back to
I'm with you guys. I'm not a fan either.
okay.
So
You're
yeah.
one of us. I like to hear it. Um, outside of car talk, outside of design and just work in general, I'm curious, JW. I always like to humanize our guests on this podcast, and I think you've done a great job at coming across as human. Um, but what are your passions, hobbies, and interests outside of work? Tell the people what you like to do.
Yeah, so snowboarding is one. So I'm relatively like I'm not young anymore. So I think I always tell my wife the excuse like, "Hey, I don't have that many days left in terms of snowboarding and powder." So she lets me go. So that's great. But
I should try that one. I
yeah,
haven't I haven't
exactly.
I haven't tried that, but I will definitely pull that out. Okay.
Because
Thank you.
like I think Mark, from the background check I did on you, it's like I think we're about similar age, and so for me, it's like I have maybe 10 good years where I can really enjoy it until I have to like take a step back a little bit. So I recently went to Japan. Tried. I used to live in Korea. They told me about Japan, but I just never went when I was in college. But I regret that now because Japan has the best powder. I mean, it is unbelievable.
I also hear they have really good sushi.
Oh, the food is great, and it's cheaper.
Yeah.
It's cheaper. It's cheaper than U.S. ski resort. They're not like, they don't price gouge as much. And then the other passion is I design my own glasses. So that was sort of it's a hobby. I wanted to make it a business, but being in startups, I know it's super hard to start up. And so, yeah, it's a hobby for now. With 3D printing, I think I've been waiting for technology so I can make stuff in small quantities on my own without the pressure of like making thousands with a manufacturer. 3D printing has come a long way. So I think it's caught up to kind of what I want to see, which is the latest 3D printers can print kind of translucent, transparent sort of frames that are skin safe. So yeah, I'm working with a couple of guys in Germany trying to, make that happen. But in the meantime, yeah, these glasses, they're metal. We did a production run of like a few hundred frames, but it wasn't good enough. So I didn't want to sell it to people. Yeah.
They look very cool to me. I will definitely say that. I did not know you made those yourself. That's fantastic. And again, for the folks listening, it's just nice to realize that all these smart people in high level positions, they have lives outside of work. You have passions and hobbies and interests, and that's why we like to have well-rounded folks like you on the podcast. With that being said, I'm going to wrap up everything. JW, please stick around for a moment after, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining Mark and I on the podcast. To those of you still listening, thank you for tuning in to listen to JW. He's been a fantastic guest. And we'll see you guys in about a week or two with a new episode. Thank you so much, JW.
Thank you.
Thank you.